Well, we're starting with a report that few in the US dare to acknowledge in public. New documents reveal how US officials misled Americans on the war in Afghanistan. The documents paint a stark picture of missteps and failures in the American effort in the war-torn country. Now, it's a Washington Post report that has called America's bluff on Afghanistan. The newspaper reported on Monday that it obtained a confidential trove of government documents. They revealed that the US officials failed to tell the truth about the war in Afghanistan throughout the 18-year war. Officials made rosy pronouncements they knew were false and hid unmistakable evidence that the war had become unwinnable. The report details how Pentagon officials privately told a watchdog for years about their deep concerns about the US war strategy in Afghanistan, including senior officials who were publicly more hopeful. The disclosure comes as US President Donald Trump and the Pentagon look to draw down the number of forces in Afghanistan. This is in order to focus more on battling Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State terror group as the US government hopes for a peace deal with the Taliban. The United States went into Afghanistan in 2001 and ousted its Taliban leadership after they refused to hand over members of the Al-Qaeda who were behind the September 11, 2001 attacks on the Twin Towers in the United States. The report quotes a three-star army general as saying that the US was devoid of a fundamental understanding of Afghanistan and that didn't know what it was doing. The general served as the White House's Afghan war czar during the presidencies of George Bush and Barack Obama. The general didn't stop at that. He says that the US didn't have the foggiest notion of what it was undertaking in Afghanistan. He blames the deaths of the US military personnel on bureaucratic breakdowns among the legislature and the government. In public, though, the US military commanders throughout the war talked about how the conflict in Afghanistan was turning a corner. This even as the Taliban held on to large parts of the country and killed US and Afghan forces without having any air combat capability. The document accessed by the Washington Post shows US generals and officials acknowledging that the strategies for fighting the Afghan war were flawed and that the US wasted hundreds of billions of dollars trying to make Afghanistan a stable democratic nation. US President George W. Bush, Barack Obama and Donald Trump all vowed they would avoid becoming mired in Afghanistan, but the report shows how even from the early days of the war, the US was confused about its basic objectives and strategy for achieving them. The US and its allies invaded Afghanistan 18 years ago to oust the Taliban from power for sheltering Al-Qaeda leaders who were accused of plotting 9/11. The Afghan war is estimated to have killed more than 150,000 people, including civilians, insurgents, locals, foreign troops. The conflict has claimed the lives of 2,400 US military personnel and cost Washington nearly $1 trillion. The US and Afghan Taliban restarted peace negotiations on Saturday, 3 months after Trump abruptly stopped the year-long process aimed at finding a political settlement with the insurgent group and ending the war in Afghanistan. The Afghan-born US Special Representative Zalmay Khalilzad led his team at a meeting Saturday in Doha where Taliban negotiators are based. Draft agreement reached between the US and Taliban would have set the stage for a phased withdrawal of the US forces from Afghanistan. In return, the Taliban had given certain guarantees and promised to engage in intra-Afghan peace negotiations to permanently end decades of hostilities in the country. And WION's Pakistan Bureau Chief Anas Malik is now joining us live for the latest on these leaked documents on the Afghan papers by the Washington Post. And Anas, clearly it seems from the revelations made that the US policy in Afghanistan has been flawed right from the beginning, and it continues to be so with the back and forth that we're seeing with the Trump administration as well.
Absolutely, Bhairavi. 18 years of war in Afghanistan. 3 presidents who have seen overlook this war, but this war just doesn't seem to end. Billions of dollars spent, scores of people dead, and despite of that, there hasn't been any significant headway or victory that the American forces would claim. Now, we have seen much back and forth, particularly with regards to the war in Afghanistan, that has been on paper, but these revelations are made by the Washington Post. They set the picture out very clearly that these claims that were these tall claims of win, they were all on paper, and the reality differed on ground. And indeed so, because I'll just take you on a ground check that if we go through in history, back in the day, before the US invasion of Afghanistan, the opium or the heroin growth that was managed by the Taliban, that was estimated between roughly about $50 million. Now that is currently at a staggering $2 billion, that the growth of heroin that is estimated by the US the own departments of the United States. Now that explains that if at all the US were indeed winning the Afghan war as it had been claimed, then how can one go and justify and bait for this win by and large? So by and large, if you look at these revelations of these documents, it basically shows that the policy opted by Washington on Afghanistan was flawed from the beginning, and it was manipulated in terms of documents, in terms of presentations. Words were changed. It is a very detailed report. It has interviews as well, and right from the top, from generals to bureaucrats, everybody seems to be involved in this manipulation. Yes, Bhairavi.
Right, Anas, thanks very much indeed for joining us with the latest there on what, of course, this latest report has revealed about the US policy as far as the Afghanistan war is concerned.